I booked the Airbnb because my life was in pieces and I needed somewhere cheap, quiet, and temporary. I just ended a long relationship, packed everything I owned into my car, and realized I had a 2-week gap before my new apartment was ready. I worked remotely, so all I needed was a table, Wi-Fi, and silence. The listing looked perfect for that. A small farmhouse, recently renovated, simple furniture, clean white walls. The description said it was owned by an older couple who lived part-time on the property, but that I would have the whole house to myself. The reviews were normal, nothing alarming. People mentioned it being peaceful, isolated, good for writing or work. I arrived just after sunset, around 7:40 p.m. The sky was already dark and the road leading to the house felt longer than it looked online. The GPS told me I had arrived, but I kept driving for another minute, unsure if I had missed it. The driveway finally appeared between 2 lines of trees, narrow and covered in loose gravel. Every turn my tires made loud popping sounds that echoed in the quiet. There were no other houses nearby, just open land and trees. The farmhouse sat back from the road, its porch light on, glowing yellow against the dark. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner mixed with old wood. It was a clean smell, but underneath it, there was something aged and dusty that hadn't fully gone away. The floors creaked in places, but that didn't bother me. Old houses do that. The furniture was simple and light-colored, almost staged. No personal photos, no clutter. It felt less like someone lived there and more like a place designed to look lived in. I told myself that was normal for an Airbnb. The first night passed quietly. I unpacked my laptop, set up at the small kitchen table, checked the Wi-Fi, and made some food. The silence was deep, the kind you notice because there's no distant traffic or voices. I slept well, mostly from exhaustion. The second day was normal. I worked, took a walk around the property, noticed a small shed in the distance and what looked like another building farther back, maybe a barn. I didn't think much of it. The owners had said they lived on the property part-time, so I assumed those were their spaces. That night, while unpacking the rest of my clothes, I noticed a door at the end of the hallway that I hadn't paid attention to before. It was a bedroom door, but it was locked. The house was listed as having 2 bedrooms. I had seen both. This was clearly a third. The lock wasn't modern. It was old, the kind that needed a skeleton key. The handle was worn smooth, like it had been used a lot over the years. I stood there longer than I meant to. I tried to remember if the listing mentioned a locked room. It hadn't. The floor plan online showed only 2 bedrooms. I touched the door lightly, half expecting it to be a closet or storage. It didn't budge. I told myself it was probably owner storage. Lots of places do that. I went to bed. The next morning, I walked past the door again on my way to the bathroom. Without really thinking about it, I placed my hand on the lock. It was warm, not slightly warm from sunlight or nearby pipes. Warm like someone had been holding it. I froze there, my hand still touching the metal. The hallway had no vents, no windows. There was no reason for that lock to be warm. I pulled my hand away and felt my heart start to race. I checked the rest of the house. Everything was as I had left it. Doors locked, windows closed, nothing disturbed. I tried to explain it logically. Old metal holding heat. Maybe pipes ran behind the wall. Maybe I imagined it. But every morning after that, the lock was warm. I started testing it. I avoided touching it for hours, then pressed my fingers against it randomly during the day. Always cool. Only in the mornings, when I woke up, it was warm. I began waking earlier without meaning to, lying still in bed and listening. The house made normal sounds, wood shifting, the refrigerator hum. Once or twice, I thought I heard movement deeper in the house, but it was always followed by silence. By the 4th day, I started noticing other things. Small things. The rug in the hallway, slightly crooked when I was sure I had straightened it. The kitchen chair not pushed in all the way. My laptop lid closed when I was certain I had left it open. I kept blaming my stress and exhaustion. Breakups mess with your head. The smell of lemon cleaner got stronger in the mornings, like someone had just wiped down surfaces. It faded by afternoon. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. for no clear reason. The house felt different. The air was heavy. I lay there listening, heart pounding, tried to convince myself I was just anxious. I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Not footsteps, more like fabric brushing against a wall. Slow, careful. I didn't get up. I stayed perfectly still until the sound stopped. The next morning, the lock was warm again, hotter than before. That was the day I noticed the scrape marks on the floor in front of the locked door. Thin lines in the wood, like something heavy had been moved in and out repeatedly. They were faint, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. I checked the listing again. The photos were unchanged, but the description now felt vague in a way it hadn't before. Owners live part-time on the property, not in the house, on the property. I walked outside and went farther back than I had before. Behind the trees, partially hidden, was a smaller structure. Not a barn, not a shed. It had a door and a small window covered from the inside. There was a narrow path worn into the grass, leading from that building toward the back of the farmhouse. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed quietly. I waited until morning, forcing myself to act normal. The lock was warm again, almost hot. I didn't touch it long enough to check. I left early, before the sun fully came up. I didn't contact the hosts. I didn't report anything. I just left. Later, from a motel, I looked up property records. The farmhouse had been renovated recently, but only partially. Old records mentioned a live-in caretaker unit attached to the main house decades ago. No mention of it being removed. The third bedroom wasn't storage. It was access. I checked out permanently and never went back. A week later, I saw the listing disappear. I still think about how careful the house was. How clean, how quiet, how every morning someone had locked themselves back inside that room and wiped down the house before I woke up. I don't book places where the owners live part-time anymore, and I don't ignore locked doors. We booked the Airbnb because we missed the last exit. It sounds small when I say it like that, but that single mistake changed the entire night. We had been driving for hours, tired, hungry, and arguing over directions in that quiet, worn-down way people do when they've been in a car too long. By the time we realized we had passed the exit for the town we planned to stay in, the GPS rerouted us onto darker roads. Every hotel we searched was either fully booked or miles back the way we came. It was close to midnight when we found the listing. The host approved instantly. That should have bothered me more than it did. It was almost 11:50 p.m., and the approval came through the second we requested it, like the host had been waiting. The listing was short and vague. Rustic home in the woods. Quiet, private, perfect for a stopover. No long description, no personal touches. Just enough photos to make it look passable. We were too tired to be picky. The house was deep in the woods, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out everything beyond the narrow driveway. There were no other houses nearby, no streetlights, no sounds except the wind moving through the trees. When we pulled in, our headlights swept across the front of the house and stopped on peeling paint and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. One porch light buzzed faintly as it flickered. Inside, the place felt wrong immediately, though I couldn't explain why at first. The listing said rustic, but this didn't feel intentionally rustic. It felt unfinished, like someone stopped halfway through fixing it up and never came back. The walls were bare drywall in some rooms and old wood paneling in others. Electrical outlets were mismatched, some newer, some yellowed and cracked. The air smelled damp, like a basement that never fully dries. There were no decorations, no photos, no books, no signs that anyone lived there, even temporarily. It didn't feel staged like most Airbnbs. It felt abandoned, but maintained just enough to pass. We dropped our bags in the living room and did a quick walkthrough. The kitchen was functional but sparse. The bedrooms were plain, each with a bed, thin blankets, and nothing else. The basement door was there but locked. I realized then that there were no photos of the basement in the listing, but I shrugged it off. Lots of places lock basements. We went to bed around 1:30 a.m., fully dressed, too tired to care. The silence outside was heavy. No bugs, no distant traffic, just the occasional creak of wood as the house settled. At 2:10 a.m., the smoke detector went off. The sound was sudden and violent, ripping us out of sleep. It wasn't a chirp or a low battery beep. It was a full alarm, sharp and echoing through the house. We jumped up, hearts racing, adrenaline hitting instantly. The first thought was fire. We smelled the air. Nothing. No smoke. No burning. No heat. We ran through the rooms, flipping lights on, checking outlets, the stove, the heater. Everything was normal. The alarm kept screaming. We finally traced it to the hallway ceiling. When we tried to remove it, it came off too easily. That's when we realized it wasn't connected to anything. No wires, no battery compartment, just a hollow plastic shell screwed into the ceiling. The sound stopped the moment it came off, leaving a ringing silence behind. We stood there staring at it, holding it in our hands, trying to understand how it had made noise at all. It didn't make sense. A fake detector shouldn't work, but it had. We didn't put it back. We checked the rest of the ceilings. There were 2 more detectors, both real, both properly wired. Only that one was fake. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt heavier. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came, trying to convince myself we were just overreacting. Around 3:30 a.m., one of us shifted in bed and kicked something hard underneath. At first, we thought it was a shoe or a piece of luggage. When we reached down and pulled it out, my stomach dropped. It was another smoke detector. This one was intact. Same model, same hollow feel. No wires, no battery. It was placed carefully under the bed, not tossed there, facing upward like it had been positioned intentionally. We checked the other bed, another one, then the couch, another. By the time we finished searching, we had found 6 of them, all fake, all placed low, under beds, behind furniture, near where someone's head would be when sleeping. That's when the purpose became clear. They weren't there to detect smoke. They were there to detect sound. We unplugged the Wi-Fi router next. It was already warm to the touch, like it had been running hard. The basement door suddenly felt more important than it had earlier. The lock on it was newer than the rest of the house, solid and clean, like it had been installed recently. We didn't check the basement. We packed in silence. No rushing, no panic movements, just slow, controlled actions. Shoes on, bags zipped, lights left on. We carried everything out to the car in one trip. As we pulled out of the driveway, the porch light shut off. Not flickered, not faded, off. The listing was gone by morning. We contacted Airbnb and reported everything. The response was polite and vague. They refunded us and said the property was under review. No follow-up, no explanation. Weeks later, I searched the address again. The house wasn't listed anymore, but the property still existed. Satellite images showed the same structure, the same trees, the same long driveway. What stood out was the basement window on the side of the house, covered from the inside. I still think about the alarm going off at exactly 2:10 a.m. I think about how the fake detector screamed only once like a test. I think about the ones under the beds, placed where sound travels best. Most of all, I think about how quickly the host approved us and how ready that house felt, like it had been waiting for someone to miss an exit. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the hospital. My sister had gone in for surgery unexpectedly, and what was supposed to be a short stay turned into something longer. I didn't want to commute back and forth every day, and hotels near the hospital were either full or priced for people who weren't watching every dollar. The Airbnb showed up near the top of the list. Walking distance, low price, high rating. The host responded within minutes when I messaged, friendly in a way that almost felt rehearsed. They used my name more than once, wished my sister a quick recovery, told me to let them know if I needed anything at all. At the time, I appreciated it. The apartment was in a newer building, one of those places that looks modern but impersonal. Gray walls, white trim, keypad entry instead of a physical key. When I stepped inside, everything was clean to the point of being sterile. No photos, no books, no throw pillows, no random objects that suggested a real person lived there. Just furniture, evenly spaced, like it had been placed by someone following instructions. I noticed it, but I didn't think much of it. A lot of Airbnb hosts strip their places down to avoid damage or theft. Still, there was something uncomfortable about how blank it felt, like a waiting room instead of a home. The first 2 nights passed without anything clearly wrong. I spent most of my time at the hospital, came back late, ate takeout, slept. The place was quiet. No noisy neighbors. No street sounds. The Wi-Fi was fast and stable. The host checked in once each day with polite messages asking if everything was okay. On the third night, I was sitting on the couch, half watching something on my laptop, half scrolling on my phone when I noticed the smoke detector. It was mounted on the ceiling directly above the couch. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the angle. It wasn't facing outward into the room like a normal detector. It was tilted slightly downward, aimed directly at the sofa. I stared at it longer than I meant to. When I stood up to get a better look, a tiny point of light flashed inside the casing. Just for a second, like glass catching a reflection. My stomach dropped. I pulled a chair over and climbed up. The detector looked normal at first glance, but when I tilted it, I saw a small, dark lens embedded behind the plastic grill. It wasn't centered. It wasn't something you'd notice unless you were close and looking for it. I stepped down slowly, my heart beating harder than it should have. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was some kind of air quality sensor. Maybe it wasn't even active. But the way it was angled, the way it pointed only at the couch and nowhere else, made my skin crawl. I checked the rest of the ceiling. The other smoke detector in the hallway was mounted normally. No lens, no tilt. That night, I didn't sit on the couch. I slept badly, waking up every couple of hours, checking the room, listening for sounds. Nothing happened, but the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, I checked the bathroom vent. I don't know why I thought to do it. Something in me just needed to look. When I shined my phone flashlight up into the vent, I saw another lens. Smaller than the first one. Hidden deeper. Almost invisible unless you were directly underneath it. There was no way to explain that away. I unplugged the Wi-Fi router immediately. The apartment went silent in a way I hadn't noticed before, like something had stopped humming in the background. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. The host had messaged me. They mentioned that the internet connection appeared to be offline and asked if everything was working properly in the apartment. They hadn't asked that any other day. I didn't respond right away. I walked through the apartment again, this time carefully. I checked behind the TV, under the bed, inside the closet. I found another device hidden behind a vent cover in the bedroom. Smaller, black, wired into the wall. I realized then how carefully the apartment had been arranged. The lack of personal items wasn't about minimalism. It was about control. Nothing blocking sight lines. Nothing unpredictable. Everything positioned so certain areas were always visible. I felt sick thinking about the first 2 nights. About sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone. About changing clothes in the bathroom. About sleeping. I packed my bag without sitting down. I left the lights on. I didn't take photos. I didn't confront the host. I just left. At the front desk of the building, I asked casually about the unit. The staff member told me it wasn't owner-occupied. It was rented short-term almost constantly, rarely vacant. I checked out early and stayed with a friend farther away from the hospital. I reported everything to Airbnb and the police. Airbnb refunded the stay and told me the listing was being investigated. The police took a statement and said they'd follow up. A few days later, the listing was gone. A week after that, my sister was discharged and life started moving again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that apartment. Not physically, but mentally. A constant awareness of where I was sitting, where cameras could be, where eyes might be. Months later, I searched the address out of curiosity. The apartment was listed again under a different host name. New photos, same furniture, same couch. The description mentioned enhanced security features. I don't stay in Airbnbs near hospitals anymore. I don't trust places that feel too empty. And every time I see a smoke detector angled the wrong way, I leave. We rented the cabin for a weekend hiking trip because it was cheap, remote, and close to a trail system we'd wanted to explore for a long time. The listing warned about wildlife, but emphasized that the cabin was sturdy, built in the 70s, solid logs, reinforced doors and shutters. It made a point of saying it had survived decades of harsh winters and curious animals. That line stuck with me later. The drive up was long and quiet. Cell service dropped about 20 minutes before we arrived. The road turned from pavement to dirt, then narrowed until tree branches scraped the sides of the car. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked exactly like the photos. A squat log structure tucked into a clearing, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. No other cabins, no power lines, just trees and silence. Inside, it smelled like old wood and dust that never fully leaves. The furniture was heavy and worn, but clean. Thick logs made up the walls, darkened with age. The windows were small, clearly designed to keep heat in and attention out. The place felt safe in the practical sense, like it had been built to endure. We spent the afternoon hiking and came back tired and sore. As night fell, the forest went completely dark. No distant lights, no horizon glow, just blackness beyond the windows. We locked the door out of habit, even though nothing suggested we needed to. The noises started not long after we went to bed. At first, it sounded like the cabin settling, old wood reacting to cooler night air. I had stayed in enough cabins to know those sounds. This wasn't that. It wasn't random pops or groans. It was slow, even, rhythmic. The walls seemed to expand and contract. There was a faint pressure sound, like air being pushed through something solid. Then a pause. Then the same sound again, over and over, too steady to ignore once I focused on it. The logs didn't creak. They flexed. The sound traveled along the wall, then faded, then came back. I lay there listening, counting the seconds between each cycle. It reminded me of breathing, deep control breaths. I told myself that was a stupid thought. Buildings don't breathe. Temperature changes can do strange things to old materials. My friend brushed it off the same way, attributing it to the cold night air and the cabin adjusting. What I couldn't explain was how the sound stopped whenever we made noise. The moment someone shifted in bed or cleared their throat, the rhythm broke. Silence would follow for several seconds. Then, once we were still again, it would slowly resume, exactly where it left off. That pattern repeated for hours. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into shallow sleep. Around 4 a.m., I woke to a new sound. Something brushed against the outside wall. Not a scratch, not a thud, a long, slow drag. It started near one corner of the cabin and moved across the logs, high enough that whatever caused it scraped the upper section of the wall. The sound was deliberate, steady, like pressure being applied and released as it moved. I froze, listening. It happened again, closer this time. The logs vibrated faintly beneath it. I could feel it through the mattress, through the floor. Whatever it was heavy, not moving fast, not circling randomly. It moved with purpose. I thought of animals first. Bears live in that area, but bears leave signs, scratches, sniffing, huffs. This thing made no sound except when it touched the cabin. No footsteps, no breathing, just that slow contact against the wall. It stopped directly outside the section of wall near my bed. The rhythmic wall noise was gone now, completely replaced by silence, so deep my ears rang. After a long moment, the pressure eased. The sound moved away, dragging along the logs once more before disappearing into the forest. Neither of us slept after that. When morning came, the forest looked normal. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Birds returned. The clearing showed no obvious damage. The logs were intact. No scratches, no broken branches. We walked the perimeter of the cabin carefully. There were no tracks, no footprints, no claw marks, no signs of digging or pacing. The ground was soft enough that something heavy should have left an impression. Instead, the grass around the cabin was pressed flat in a wide circle, like something had stood there for a long time and shifted its weight evenly. The circle wasn't tight or chaotic. It was smooth, measured, almost intentional. The pressed grass reached close to the walls, but never touched them directly, as if whatever made it knew exactly how far to stay back. We left early. On the drive down, neither of us talked much. The forest thinned, cell service returned, and the world felt louder than it should have. Later that week, out of curiosity, I looked up wildlife behavior in the area. Bears don't move like that. Elk don't approach structures quietly at night. Moose leave deep tracks and broken vegetation. Nothing large enough to reach that high on the logs made sense without leaving evidence. I also reread the listing. The warning about wildlife wasn't general. It was specific. It mentioned large animals approaching the cabin at night and advised guests not to leave food outside and not to investigate noises after dark. It also said the cabin had been reinforced multiple times over the years, though it never said why. The last line stood out the most. It said the cabin had never been broken into. Not that nothing had tried, just that nothing had succeeded. I still hike. I still rent cabins. But I don't stay in places that talk about being sturdy without explaining what they're built to withstand. And I don't ignore noises that stop when you acknowledge them. Some things don't want to be noticed. They want to be listened to. I moved into the house because it was cheap and quiet, and at that point in my life, quiet felt like safety. The neighborhood looked normal enough. Small houses, narrow driveways, chain link fences, and yards that were just big enough to pretend you cared about them. People kept to themselves. Cars left in the morning and came back at night. Nothing stood out. The house next to mine belonged to a man who lived alone. I didn't know his name at first. I only knew his routines. Every morning, his porch light turned off at 6:12. His front door opened at 6:15. His car started at 6:17. He drove away slowly, never speeding, never backing out too fast. Every evening, he returned at 7:48. Same order, same timing. At first, I didn't even realize I was noticing these things. They just sank into my head over time. When you live alone, patterns become comforting. Predictable neighbors feel safe. He never waved, never acknowledged me, but I saw him watching, not staring exactly, just aware. If I was outside, he stayed on his porch a little longer. If I took my trash out late, his kitchen light would turn on. If I came home late, his car would already be parked, but the engine would still be warm when I walked past. I told myself that was coincidence. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Then small things started feeling wrong. My trash cans were moved, not knocked over, not rummaged through, just shifted slightly, inches, sometimes a foot. I thought it was the wind at first, but the lids were always closed, perfectly placed. One morning, my recycling bin was back by the fence instead of the curb. I was sure I had put it out the night before. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember. Memory is fragile. It bends when you want it to. I started locking my doors during the day. One afternoon, I came home early from work. As I turned onto my street, I saw him standing in my yard. Not near the sidewalk, not by the fence. He was standing close to my house, facing one of my windows. He didn't react when my car pulled in. He didn't jump or turn quickly. He just stepped back slowly, walked to his yard, and went inside. I didn't confront him. I didn't wave. I sat in my car longer than I should have, watching his house. The blinds didn't move. The lights stayed off. That night, I checked every window and door before going to bed. Everything was locked. Everything was normal. I started noticing marks near my back gate. Scuffed dirt, bent grass, a latch that didn't sit quite right anymore. Nothing obvious enough to prove anything, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I installed a cheap camera facing my backyard. It wasn't great quality, but it was something. The first few nights, nothing showed up. Then one night, at 2:13 a.m., the motion alert went off. I watched the footage with the lights off, volume low. The camera caught him standing at the edge of the frame, not entering the yard, just standing there, facing my house. He stayed there for 6 minutes. He didn't move closer. He didn't leave. He just stood, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening. Then he stepped back and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I stayed home. I watched his house. His routine didn't change. Porch light off, door open, car gone, like nothing had happened. That's when I started noticing how little he owned. No decorations, no yard tools, no packages, no visitors, no trash bags left out overnight. His bins were always empty. One evening, I saw him carrying a black bag to his car. Not a trash bag, thicker. He placed it carefully in the trunk and drove away. He came back an hour later with the trunk empty. I checked my camera footage more often after that. Most nights, he didn't appear at all. Other nights, he walked the perimeter of my fence. Slow, careful, never stepping fully into view. He never touched anything on camera. That came later. I woke up one morning and found my back door unlocked. I stood there staring at it, my hand on the handle, my chest tight. I knew I had locked it. I always did. I tested the lock every night. I had started checking it twice. Nothing inside was missing. Nothing was disturbed. The house smelled the same, felt the same, but something had changed. I felt exposed. That night, I didn't turn any lights on. I sat in the dark, watching the camera feed on my phone. Around 1:40 a.m., I saw movement. He was inside my yard. This time, he didn't stop at the edge. He walked slowly toward my back door. He stopped inches from it. He leaned forward slightly, like he was listening. He reached out and touched the door handle. He didn't try to open it. He stood there for a long time, then stepped back and left. The next morning, I found mud on my kitchen floor. A single footprint. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what to say. There was no damage, no theft, just a footprint and a feeling I couldn't shake. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my bedroom door. Days went by without incident. Then weeks. I thought maybe he had lost interest. Maybe he realized I was watching. Then my camera stopped working. Not broken, not unplugged. The footage just cut out for 3 hours one night. When it came back, the timestamp jumped forward. No error message, no alert. That same morning, I found a note taped to my back fence. No words, just a hand-drawn outline of my house. Every door marked, every window, including the ones not visible from the street. I packed a bag that day. I stayed with a friend for 2 nights. When I came back to get more clothes, his car was gone. His house was dark. No porch light, no sound. I checked online listings later. His house wasn't for sale. It wasn't for rent. No record of a move. 3 days later, the police were on my street. They went into his house. I watched from my window as they carried things out in evidence bags. Tools, black plastic, cameras, printed photos. I learned later that he had been arrested miles away, breaking into a different home. The officer who spoke to me told me my house was listed in a notebook they found in his car. Pages of notes, my routines, my work schedule, the times my lights turned off, the nights I slept late. The reason he hadn't broken in yet was simple. He was waiting for the right night. I moved out within a week. I don't live alone anymore. Sometimes when I take the trash out at night, I still feel that same tightness in my chest. That feeling of being observed without seeing who's watching. Because what scares me the most isn't that he was my neighbor. It's how long he lived next to me without ever doing anything wrong. I booked the Airbnb because I needed somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I had just finished a temporary contract in a city I wasn't planning to stay in, and my next job didn't start for another 2 weeks. Hotels were too expensive for that long. I didn't want roommates. I wanted a door that locked and a place where I could exist without explaining myself to anyone. The listing was cheap, close to public transit, and described as quiet, private, and ideal for longer stays. The host approved me almost immediately. The messages were polite, professional, and oddly detailed. They explained how to use the keypad, which trash bin to use on which day, how the water pressure worked, and asked me to confirm my arrival time, even though the check-in was self-service. I told myself they were just thorough. The building was an older converted house, split into several apartments. It sat on a narrow street lined with parked cars and identical buildings. Nothing about it stood out. The front door opened into a shared hallway that smelled faintly of cleaning spray and something musty underneath. My unit was on the ground floor, at the end of the hall. Inside, the apartment was clean and empty in a way that felt intentional. White walls, gray couch, a bed with plain sheets. No pictures, no plants, no personal items. Even the kitchen cabinets were mostly bare. There were plates and cups, but no food, no spices, no leftovers from previous guests. The closet held only hangers. The bathroom had fresh towels, but no extras. It felt less like a place someone stayed and more like a place someone passed through. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked slowly, worked on my laptop, went out for food, came back to sleep. The apartment was quiet, but not completely. I could hear the buildings settling, pipes moving, distant traffic. Normal city sounds. At night, I sometimes heard footsteps in the hallway, but they never stopped outside my door. On the fourth night, I noticed the sound. It was subtle at first, almost easy to miss. A faint click, followed by a soft hum. It came from somewhere above the bathroom. I stood still, listening, trying to pinpoint it. The hum lasted a few seconds, then stopped. I checked the bathroom fan. It was off. The lights were off. Everything was normal. The sound didn't come back that night, and I forgot about it. Over the next few days, small things started to feel off. My laptop lid was closed when I was sure I'd left it open. The bathroom light was on once when I came back from the store, even though I remembered turning it off. The front door was always locked when I checked, but the lock felt warm sometimes, like it had been handled recently. I blamed myself. Stress, fatigue, the weird mental fog that comes from being in between places. One evening, while sitting on the couch, I noticed the smoke detector. It was mounted on the ceiling above the living area, but instead of facing outward like normal, it was angled slightly toward the couch. I stared at it for a long time before standing up to look closer. From the floor, it looked ordinary. From a chair, I saw the tiny dark circle behind the plastic vent. A lens. I climbed down slowly and sat back on the couch, my heart beating harder than it should have. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Some modern detectors have sensors. Some have air quality monitors. But the angle bothered me. It wasn't positioned to detect smoke rising. It was positioned to see. That night, I didn't sit on the couch again. The next morning, I checked the listing photos. The smoke detector wasn't visible in any of them. I zoomed in on the ceiling corners. Nothing. The description mentioned standard safety features. Nothing else. I started looking more closely at the apartment. I checked the corners of the ceiling. I checked behind the TV. I checked the vent above the shower. Inside the vent, tucked behind the slats, was another small black device. This one had a wire running deeper into the wall. I felt cold all over. I unplugged the Wi-Fi router immediately. The apartment fell silent in a way I hadn't noticed before, like a background noise had stopped. I waited. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from the host. They said the internet connection appeared to be offline and asked if everything was okay. They hadn't checked in for days. They noticed within minutes. I didn't reply. Instead, I started packing. Slowly, quietly. I didn't want to draw attention. I took essentials first, slipping them into my bag, and then into my car when I went out for food. I left clothes behind. I left books. I left things that would make it look like I was still staying. That night, the sounds came back. The soft click, the hum. Louder now, more frequent. It came from behind the walls, from the ceiling, from a space above the bathroom. I lay in bed, fully dressed, listening to it cycle on and off. When I shifted, it stopped. When I stayed still, it resumed. Around 2 a.m., I heard something else. A faint scrape, not inside the apartment, in the wall. It moved slowly, vertically, like someone adjusting their position in a narrow space. The sound traveled from the bathroom wall toward the bedroom. I could hear breathing, not heavy, controlled, someone trying to stay quiet. I held my breath without meaning to. The scrape stopped directly behind the wall near my bed. The hum stopped too. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into shallow sleep. In the morning, I checked the wall carefully. No marks, no damage, but the outlet near the floor was loose. When I touched it, it shifted slightly, revealing a gap behind it. I shined my phone light inside. There was a hollow space behind the wall, wider than it should have been, deep enough for someone to fit. I left that morning and didn't come back. I reported everything to Airbnb. I reported it to the police. Airbnb refunded the stay and told me the listing was under investigation. The police took a statement and said they'd follow up, but there was no urgency in their voices, no visible concern. A week later, the listing was gone. Out of curiosity, I searched the address online. I found an old forum post from years earlier. Someone mentioned staying in that building and hearing movement in the walls. Another person replied, saying the building had been renovated after a code issue involving shared access spaces between units. Someone else said the owner lived on site for years before switching to short-term rentals. I searched property records. The building had been owned by the same person for over 20 years. A month later, the listing was back. Different host name, same photos, same description, same price. I still think about how empty the apartment was, how clean, how controlled, how the lack of personal items wasn't about minimalism. It was about making sure nothing blocked the view, nothing made noise, nothing interfered. I don't stay in Airbnbs anymore. I don't trust places that feel too quiet. I don't trust hosts who notice things too quickly. And I don't ignore the feeling that someone is paying attention when they shouldn't be. Some spaces aren't rented for comfort. They're rented for access. I booked the place because I didn't have a choice. The conference had flooded the city with people, and hotel prices jumped overnight. I found a private room in a shared house listed cheap enough to make sense. The photos showed a clean but boring place. White walls, gray couch, no personality. The host wrote that he'd be away for most of my stay, but would leave instructions on the counter. It sounded simple. I needed a bed, Wi-Fi, and quiet after long days of meetings. I arrived in the early evening, just after sunset. The street was calm, mostly parked cars and dim porch lights. The house looked normal, maybe a little older than the photos suggested. The front lawn was trimmed, but uneven, like someone had rushed through it. The porch light was already on. The door unlocked easily with the code he sent earlier. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Clean but lived in. Laundry detergent mixed with something warm, like food that had been cooked recently. The instructions were exactly where he said they'd be, laid out neatly on the kitchen counter. Printed pages stapled with bullet points about Wi-Fi, trash days, and which shelves were mine. The handwriting at the bottom said "Welcome," signed with his first name. Everything felt organized, planned. Too planned for someone who was supposed to be away. The house was quiet. Not the normal quiet of an empty place, but a heavy quiet like something was pressing down on the air. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of a wall clock somewhere deeper in the house. No music, no TV, no voices. I told myself it was just because I'd expected noise in a shared house and didn't get it. I walked into the kitchen to put my groceries away. The fridge light came on, bright and full. It was packed with fresh food, cut vegetables in sealed containers, milk that hadn't been opened yet, leftovers labeled with dates from that same week, fruit that wasn't bruised, not the kind of fridge someone leaves behind when they're gone for days. It looked like someone had been using it that morning. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the shelves, doing mental math that didn't add up. I reminded myself that people sometimes prep food before trips, that didn't explain how fresh everything looked or how cold some of it still felt like it had just been put away. I found my room at the end of the hallway on the first floor. The door was open, bed made tight, towels folded on the chair. The air inside smelled faintly of soap, not stale at all. I set my bag down and went to use the bathroom before unpacking. The bathroom light flicked on, and I froze. The mirror was streaked with fog, thin lines slowly sliding down the glass. The room was warm, humid, like a shower had just ended minutes earlier. The fan was off. The towel hanging on the rack was damp at the edges. I stood there listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No water running. Just the house breathing around me. I waited longer than I should have before convincing myself it was old humidity trapped in the room. Maybe the fan didn't work well. Maybe the host had left in a hurry. I wiped the mirror with my sleeve and tried to laugh it off, but the feeling didn't leave. That first night, I locked my door before sleeping. I don't normally do that in shared places, but my hand went to the lock without thinking. I lay in bed, scrolling on my phone until my eyes burned, trying to drown out the silence. Around 1 a.m., I heard the first creak. It came from upstairs. Slow, heavy, like someone shifting their weight carefully. Then another, farther away. Then another. The sound moved across the ceiling, step by step, not rushed, not random. It sounded like someone walking through rooms, stopping, then continuing. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening hard. I didn't hear voices. I didn't hear drawers or doors. Just the floorboards, one by one, tracing a path I couldn't see. After a while, it stopped. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I woke up exhausted and uneasy. I checked my phone and saw a message from the host sent just after 1 a.m. He apologized for the noise and said the house sometimes made sounds at night. I hadn't told him anything. I hadn't messaged him at all. I stared at the screen, then put the phone face down and told myself it was coincidence. Maybe he sent that to all guests as a routine thing. Maybe he'd had complaints before. The conference kept me busy during the day. Bright rooms, crowded halls, constant noise. It helped me forget the house for a few hours at a time. But every evening, walking back down that quiet street, my chest tightened as I got closer. The signs kept piling up. Shoes by the front door that I didn't remember seeing before, then moved the next day. Trash in the kitchen bin that wasn't mine. The smell of coffee in the morning when I hadn't brewed any. The shower curtains sometimes pulled closed, sometimes open. Each time, there was an explanation if I tried hard enough. Old house, shared space, my memory playing tricks on me. I kept my door locked at night and told myself that was enough. Every night at 1 a.m., the footsteps came back. Same time, same slow pace. Sometimes they lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 20. Always upstairs, always moving like someone who knew the layout well. Every night, the host messaged around the same time, apologizing again. He mentioned noise even when I stayed silent. The messages felt automatic at first, then strangely specific, like he knew exactly when the creaking started and stopped. By the fourth night, I started staying awake on purpose, watching the clock creep closer to 1. When it happened, I recorded audio on my phone, my hand shaking as the sounds traveled above me. The recording caught everything clearly. Slow steps, a pause, another step. The next morning, I checked the listing again. The house was described as shared, but no other guests were listed. Just me. The host profile showed a smiling photo and dozens of positive reviews. People mentioned how quiet the place was. On the 5th night, the creaking changed. It didn't just move across the ceiling. It stopped directly above my room. The sound lingered there, shifting back and forth like someone standing still and adjusting their stance. I held my breath in the dark, listening so hard my ears rang. I thought about the fridge, the shower, the messages. The idea that the host wasn't away at all stopped feeling dramatic and started feeling obvious. I packed my bag before dawn. I didn't wait for checkout time. I didn't leave a note. I unlocked the door quietly and stepped outside into the cold morning air, relief washing over me as soon as the house was behind me. At the airport, while waiting for my flight home, I checked my phone. Another message from the host had come in around 1 a.m., apologizing for the noise and thanking me for being understanding. Later that week, I reported the stay to the platform. I included the audio recording. I described everything in detail. They replied with a generic response and said they'd look into it. The listing disappeared a few days after that. Months later, I read a local news article about a man arrested for secretly living in his own rental property while advertising himself as away, using locked rooms and schedules to avoid being seen. The photo was small, but I recognized the smile immediately. I still think about that house sometimes, about how quiet it was during the day, about how careful the footsteps sounded at night, about how close someone can be without ever letting themselves be seen. Now, whenever I stay somewhere unfamiliar, I listen closely, not just for noise, but for patterns. Because what scared me most wasn't the sound themselves. It was how planned they were and how someone knew exactly when I would hear them. I had been on the road for almost 3 weeks, moving from place to place with no real plan. I was trying to spend as little money as possible, sleeping in my car most nights, washing up in gas station bathrooms, eating whatever didn't need refrigeration. I told myself it was temporary, just a way to stretch my savings while I figured out what came next. Most nights I didn't mind it. The car felt familiar, predictable, but every once in a while the exhaustion caught up to me. My back would ache. My sleep would turn shallow and broken. That was when I'd look for one real bed, just for a night. The listing popped up while I was parked outside a grocery store using their Wi-Fi. It was cheap, cheaper than anything else within 100 miles. A trailer on private land, miles from the nearest town. The photos showed an old but clean travel trailer sitting alone in a wide stretch of desert. Flat land, low hills in the distance. Nothing else around. The description was short, quiet, isolated, perfect for rest. The host mentioned there was no cell service and said I should download directions beforehand. That should have been enough to make me scroll past. But the price and the promise of a mattress pulled me in. I downloaded the map, saved the screenshots, and booked it without thinking much more about it. I arrived just before sunset. The paved road ended miles before the turnoff. After that, it was dirt and gravel, my tires kicking up dust that hung in the air behind me. The land felt endless. No fences, no houses, just scrub, sand, and the occasional dead tree. The sun dropped fast, turning everything orange, then purple, then gray. The trailer sat exactly where the map said it would. Alone, no other structures nearby. No lights except one dim bulb over the door. My phone lost signal a few minutes before I arrived, the bars dropping to nothing. I felt that small spike of panic you get when you realize you're cut off, then forced myself to calm down. I'd done this before. I didn't need service for one night. The trailer door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like dust and old fabric, but not rot. Someone had cleaned recently. The bed was made with stiff sheets that had been washed too many times. There was a small table, a kitchenette with a sink, and a tiny bathroom where the shower doubled as the floor. It wasn't comfortable, but it was solid. Safe enough. I locked the door behind me and pulled the blinds closed. Outside, the desert went completely quiet. No traffic, no wind. The silence felt wide and exposed, like I was standing in the open with nothing to hide behind. I ate a protein bar, brushed my teeth using bottled water, and laid down fully dressed. The mattress felt incredible after weeks of sleeping curled up in my car. My body sank into it, heavy and grateful. I told myself I would sleep through the night and leave early in the morning. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I lay still, eyes open in the dark, listening. Then I heard it, a crunching sound outside the trailer. Slow, deliberate, sand shifting under weight. Another crunch followed, closer this time. Then another. Footsteps. They moved slowly, unevenly, circling the trailer. Not rushing, not sneaking, just moving step by step like whoever was had all the time in the world. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening as the sound passed by the wall near my head, then drifted away toward the back of the trailer. I told myself it was an animal. Coyotes lived out here. Maybe a stray dog. Maybe livestock from somewhere farther out. But the steps didn't sound light. They sounded heavy, flat, wrong somehow. I slid out of bed quietly and crept toward the window. My hands shook as I lifted the blind, just enough to see outside. The dim porch light cast a weak circle on the sand. Beyond it was darkness. I saw nothing. The footsteps continued, crunching around the other side of the trailer, then fading, then returning again. One full circle, then another. Always slow, always uneven. I checked the door. It was still locked. The windows were closed. The trailer felt thin suddenly, like a shell that wouldn't stop anything if someone decided to push. I stood there for a long time, listening until the sounds finally stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. I didn't go back to bed. I sat on the edge of the mattress until dawn, watching the faint light creep in through the blinds. When the sun came up, the desert looked normal again. Empty, harmless. I stepped outside carefully, scanning the land in every direction. There were no people, no animals, just sand stretching out around the trailer. Then I looked down. The footprints were clear in the morning light. They circled the trailer exactly where I'd heard the sounds, but they didn't look like shoe prints. They were long and flat, with no clear tread. The front was wide, the heel dragged slightly, leaving a smear at the back of each step. The stride was uneven, like whoever made them favored one side. They were too big to be a child's, too shapeless to be boots, too deliberate to be an animal. I followed them a short distance away from the trailer. They didn't lead anywhere. They just faded into disturbed sand, like whoever had been there had turned around or stepped carefully to avoid leaving more marks. I packed quickly. I didn't use the bathroom. I just wanted to leave while it was daylight. Before I pulled away, I took photos of the prints with my phone, even though I knew I wouldn't have service to send them to anyone. I needed proof, even if only for myself, that I hadn't imagined it. Hours later, when I reached the town and my phone buzzed back to life, I received a message from the host. He told me not to worry. He said people pass through the land sometimes. He made it sound normal, expected, like the desert was just something that moved around on its own. The message didn't explain the prints. It didn't explain the circling. It didn't explain why someone would walk that way in the dark around a trailer they knew was occupied. I didn't respond. I drove until my eyes burned and my hands cramped on the steering wheel. I stopped at a crowded rest area that night and slept in my car with other vehicles around me. The noise of engines and voices feeling comforting instead of annoying. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for the listing again. It was gone. No trace of it. No reviews. No photos. Just empty search results where it used to be. I still think about that night when I'm lying awake somewhere unfamiliar. I think about how isolated I was, how easily someone could have tested the space around me without ever touching the door. I think about the way the steps moved, patient and unafraid, like they knew exactly where they were and exactly how alone I was. I don't travel like that anymore. I don't sleep on private land. I don't book places without service. And when I hear footsteps outside at night, even now, I don't look for what made them. I lock the doors, stay still, and wait for morning, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what leaves marks behind and walks away without ever being caught. We rented the place because it was cheap for the location and close enough to the slopes that we wouldn't have to drive far in snow. It was supposed to be an easy trip. A few days of skiing, early mornings sur legs, quiet nights. The listing showed a small mountain house tucked into a tree line. Nothing fancy, just clean and practical. The kind of place meant to sleep in, not hang out in. That was fine with us. We arrived in the afternoon while it was still light out. Snow covered everything evenly, untouched except for the driveway and a narrow path to the front door. The air smelled sharp and cold. Inside, the house was warm but not cozy. The heat was already on when we arrived, the vents blowing dry air that made the place smell faintly of dust and metal. Boots by the door, a rack for skis, a couch that looked like it had been there since the 90s. Nothing felt wrong at first. It was only when we started unpacking that we noticed the closet. It was in the living room, right next to the couch, built into the wall. A tall door painted the same off-white as everything else. No handle, just a heavy metal lock mounted on the outside, the kind you'd expect on a shed or utility box. It looked out of place, like it had been added later. The door itself was solid, not hollow like the others in the house. We stood there longer than we meant to, staring at it. The listing mentioned a locked closet containing maintenance equipment. That was enough of an explanation on paper. Still, it felt strange to lock something like that in the main room instead of the garage or basement. We shrugged it off. Mountain houses were often weirdly laid out. Owners did things their own way. That first night, we were exhausted. Skiing all day, muscles burning, faces wind-chapped. We cooked a simple dinner, turned the heat up a little, and collapsed onto the couch. The house creaked and settled the way cold places do. Wood popping, distant thuds in the walls. Normal sounds. Then came a knocking. It started softly. A dull knock from inside the wall behind the locked closet. Then another. Not rhythmic. Not spaced out evenly. Just a knock, then silence. Then two quicker ones close together. We paused, listening. It sounded like the heating system adjusting, but it didn't follow any pattern we recognized. Pipes usually clicked or rattled when heat moved through them. This was slower, heavier, like something tapping from the other side. We told ourselves it was the pipes anyway. Old house, cold weather, nothing to worry about. But it kept happening. Every time the heat kicked on, the sounds came back. Sometimes just one knock, sometimes a short series. Always from the same spot, always from inside the closet. The second night was worse. We came back late, snow falling thick and quiet, the world muffled and dark. The house was cold when we walked in, the heat having dropped while we were gone. As it warmed up, the knocking started again, louder than before. One of the knocks was so hard it made the closet door shudder slightly. That got our attention. We walked closer, put our ears near the door. The sound came from deep inside, not from the surface of the wall. There was a hollow, enclosed quality to it, like the noise was trapped and pressing outward. We checked the lock. It was intact. Thick metal loop bolted into the frame. The door itself didn't move when we pushed on it. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. The living room didn't feel like a place to relax anymore. The couch felt too close to that door. The whole room felt smaller, tighter, like the space was leaning inward. That night, the power went out. It happened suddenly, with no warning. One moment the lights were on, the heater humming, and the next everything went dead. The silence that followed was immediate and deep. No heat, no fridge, no background noise at all. Outside, the storm continued, snow tapping faintly against the windows. Then we heard it, a heavy shift from inside the closet. Not a knock, not a tap, a long, dragging movement like something large changing position. The sound scraped along the inside surface of the door, slow and deliberate. We froze. Another sound followed. Scratching. Not fast, not frantic, just slow, steady pressure moving across the inside of the door, back and forth like someone testing the surface. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just stood there in the dark, listening to the sound repeat itself. The scratching stopped after a while. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt like waiting for something you couldn't see to decide what to do next. When the power finally came back on, the heater roared to life. The normal house noises returned. The knocking didn't. We didn't sleep much that night. We stayed in the bedroom with the door closed, lights on, listening for any sound from the living room. Nothing came. Morning light made the house look harmless again. Bright snow, blue sky, steam rising from the roof. For a moment, we almost convinced ourselves we'd imagined the worst of it. Then we saw the lock. The metal loop was bent outward, just slightly, but enough that it no longer sat flush against the door. The screws were still tight. The wood around it wasn't cracked. It looked like something inside had leaned its weight against the door, slowly, carefully testing the strength of it. We didn't touch it. We packed up immediately, threw gear into bags, boots half-laced, food left behind. We didn't ski that day. We didn't wait for checkout time. Later, after we were home, we looked up the property again. The listing was still active. The description unchanged. No mention of power outages. No mention of heating issues. No mention of anything inside that closet beyond maintenance equipment. We reported what we saw. We sent photos of the bent lock. The response we got was polite and empty. They said they would look into it. The listing stayed up. I still think about that closet sometimes. About how close it was to where we sat. About the way the sounds weren't random, weren't chaotic, but careful and controlled. Whatever was inside didn't panic. It didn't rush. It waited. And what bothers me most is that someone knew enough to lock it in there, reinforce the door, and still rent the place out like nothing was wrong. Now, whenever I stay somewhere new, I look for locked doors that don't make sense. I listen closely to the sounds houses make at night, because there's a difference between a building settling and something pushing back from the other side. I booked it in a rush, standing outside a train station with my backpack on and my phone about to die. I had been moving city to city for weeks, staying wherever was cheap and available. Hostels were full. Prices were climbing. I just needed a place to sleep and shower for a few nights before moving on. The listing looked perfect for that. Bright interior, white walls, clean windows that let in a lot of light. Simple furniture. Nothing fancy, but not depressing either. The photos made the place feel open, like you could breathe inside it. I booked it without thinking too hard. When I arrived, the house didn't look like the pictures. It wasn't dramatically different at first glance. Same general shape, same color on the outside, but it felt smaller, tighter. The windows were in different places than I remembered from the listing photos. Where I expected a wide front window, there was a narrow one instead. The door felt closer to the street than it should have been. I stood there with my phone in my hand, comparing the photo to what I was seeing. I told myself the photos were old. Renovations happened. Hosts changed layouts all the time. I was tired and didn't want to deal with canceling and finding somewhere else. Inside, the difference was clearer. The interior was darker than the photos showed. The walls were white, but not clean white, more like layers of paint built up over time. The ceiling felt lower. The windows were smaller and placed higher on the walls, letting in less light. Even during the day, the rooms felt dim, like the sun couldn't quite reach inside. The furniture matched the photos closely enough that I stopped worrying. Same couch, same small table, same lamp in the corner. I dropped my bag and sat down, telling myself I was overthinking it. The layout was simple. Front room, narrow hallway, bathroom on the left, bedroom at the end. I walked through it once to get my bearings. Nothing strange happened then. The hallway felt narrow, but old houses often do. That first night, I showered, ate some food I'd picked up earlier, and went to bed early. I was exhausted in that deep, dull way that comes from moving too much for too long. I slept hard. The second night was when I noticed the hallway. I woke up around midnight, needing to use the bathroom. I stepped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, half asleep, not fully paying attention. It took longer than expected to reach the bathroom door. Just a step or two longer, but enough that I noticed it. I stopped and looked down the hallway. The bathroom door was still there, same place as before. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. The next evening, after being out all day, I noticed it again. Walking from the front room to the bedroom felt slightly longer than it should have. The hallway seemed to stretch just a little, like the walls were pulling apart when I wasn't looking. I measured it with my steps, quietly, feeling stupid while I did it. Same number of steps as before. Same doors. Same walls. Nothing had changed. At night, though, it felt different. The house was quiet in a way that made small sounds stand out. The hum of electricity, the soft creak of the floor when I shifted my weight. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. When I walked down the hallway in the dark, the bathroom door looked farther away than it had during the day. Not by much, just enough to feel wrong. I turned the lights on. Everything snapped back to normal. I started leaving lights on at night after that. By the third night, the feeling was impossible to ignore. I walked toward the bathroom, watching the door the whole time, and it felt like it was slowly drifting away from me. The walls didn't move. The ceiling didn't stretch. Just the distance between me and the door felt longer, like the space itself was deepening. I reached the door eventually, but my heart was racing by the time I did. I stood there for a while afterward, listening, trying to calm myself down. I told myself I was tired. That backpacking messes with your sense of space and time. That unfamiliar places always feel strange at night. Still, I slept with the bedroom door open after that, so I could see the hallway clearly when I woke up. On the final night, I woke suddenly, fully alert. The room felt wrong immediately. Too quiet, too still. I rolled onto my side, expecting to see the dim shape of the hallway through the open door. Instead, I was staring at a wall. It was inches from my face. Flat, white, no door, no opening, just a solid surface where empty space had been before. I sat up so fast my head spun. The wall stayed there, close enough that I could see small cracks in the paint, uneven texture where someone had rolled over it too many times. My bed was no longer facing the hallway. It was pushed against this wall, boxed in like the room had been shortened while I slept. I stood up and pressed my hand against the surface. It was solid, cold, not a temporary divider or a curtain. A real wall. Panic hit me hard then, sharp and physical. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I turned, looking for the bedroom door. It was still there, but closer than it should have been. The room itself was smaller. The distance between the bed and the door had been reduced, like the far end of the room had been cut off. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. It was longer than I had ever seen it. The bathroom door was far down the corridor, smaller in the distance, like the end of tunnel. The walls felt closer together, pressing in slightly as I walked. My footsteps sounded dull, swallowed by the space. I walked slowly, counting steps, trying not to panic. The number kept increasing, more than before, more than made sense. When I finally reached the bathroom, I locked myself inside and sat on the floor, back against the tub, breathing through the fear. I stayed there until morning light filtered in through the small frosted window. In daylight, the house looked normal again. The hallway was its original length. The bedroom was its original size. The wall that had been inches from my face was gone. The bed was back where I remembered leaving it. I packed immediately. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I stuffed everything into my backpack and left as soon as I could. Before walking out, I took photos of every room, every wall, every corner, needing proof that I wasn't losing my mind. After I left, I sent the checkout message to the host, thanking them and letting them know I was gone. I didn't mention the wall. I didn't mention the hallway. They never replied. Days later, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up the listing again. The photos still showed the bright interior, wide hallway, open space. None of the images matched what I had experienced at night. I searched the address on public records. The house had been sold multiple times in a short period. Renovations were listed. Interior changes. No details. I realized then that what scared me wasn't the idea of something impossible happening. It was the idea that the house was being altered in ways I couldn't see while I was inside it. That walls could be added, shifted, removed. That space itself could be manipulated slowly, carefully, without leaving obvious traces by morning. Now, whenever I book a place last minute, I check the photos closely. I count doors. I look at window placement. And when I walk down a hallway at night, I pay attention to how far things feel. Because sometimes it's not the house that's wrong during the day. Sometimes it's what the house becomes when no one is watching.